Tonight, President Trump holds a rally in Arizona but leaves the facts behind him in Washington. The president lied again, gave partial truths, or misled his supporters so often last night and with such startling implications. We're going to need fact checkers to work overtime, and tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. Then jury selection wraps up in the corruption and bribery trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. And more than his guilt or innocence could be on the line, the fate of Trump Care and other huge issues could also be at stake. We'll explain in our legal panel. We'll discuss his case now that the Supreme Court has changed the rules on what is and what isn't corruption. And later, after a gunman ambushes a judge in Ohio, and in light of the violence in Charlottesville, we ask, are protecting judges and prosecutors from the people who might seek revenge a more timely question than ever before? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to this hour. Thank you for joining us. Now, I think I can safely say that most Americans agree, and did even before this election, that Donald Trump has a troubled relationship when it comes to the truth. Many would call him an outright liar. Now, even before divisive Donald went to Phoenix last night for a campaign rally, nearly 2/3 of Americans did not approve of the job that he was doing as president. And I'll have more poll numbers or even more specific as to why. But the president last night did nothing to move the needle among those who are critical of him. So we are going to play a host of clips from the president last night so you can see and hear what he said. Then we'll actually show you and tell you the truth on those topics. Now, you may say, why, Rich? I already know, this guy, will either exaggerate or make things up out of whole cloth. What's the point? The answer is because if this kind of presidential malpractice is allowed to continue, and I don't care what party you are, whether it's this president or people who follow him into the Oval Office, I really believe it could have consequences that would be disastrous, not just for our government, our country, but also for what we hold dear. I want to bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, who's had the unfortunate task of not only dissecting last night, but also putting it into a prism as to this isn't funny anymore. This has become predictable. And I wouldn't say hilarity, but the awful hypocrisy of that this is supposed to be Unity Week, and every other day, almost Jekyll and Hyde one day to the next, he does more and more to rip us apart as a country.
And Rich, it's really not funny anymore, despite the jokes and despite the fact that he's entertaining to watch, but it isn't funny. We could literally go line by line through all 77 minutes of the president's rally last night and make corrections to almost all of it. But we don't have that kind of time. So let's start with Mr. Trump's biggest blunder last night, not being truthful about his response to Charlottesville. Here's the president last night.
Here's what I said on Saturday. We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is me speaking. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. That's me speaking on Saturday, right after the event.
Not exactly. Here's what Trump actually said on August 12th after the violence in Charlottesville.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
And what he didn't say last night makes all the difference. Leaving out the line of on many sides erases his putting neo-Nazis and white supremacists on the same level as the people who were protesting against them. And that's what got so many people upset in the wake of Charlottesville. Then there's his take last night on Confederate monuments.
They're trying to take away our culture. They're trying to take away our history. And our weak leaders, they do it overnight. These things have been there for 150 years, for 100 years. You go back to a university and it's gone.
The truth is that Trump has flip-flopped on Confederate monuments just in recent days, and during the campaign he supported removing Confederate flags, which, by the way, is another Confederate monument. Oh, and his reference to our culture and history? Trump's family came to the U.S. after the Civil War, never lived in the South. Next Trump lie, the wall and who will pay for it.
We are building a wall on the southern border, which is absolutely necessary. Now, the obstructionist Democrats would like us not to do it, but believe me, If we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
Close down the government if we have to build that wall. Only that is miles and miles away from what candidate Trump said about the wall and how to pay for it.
Mexico will pay for the wall.
So Trump will shut the government down if Congress doesn't pay for the wall that he says Mexico will pay for. And that government shutdown Trump so glibly threatened would throw millions of people out of work for a time, deny seniors their Social Security, and potentially lead to credit downgrades for the nation and much more. Oh, and parties or presidents that are blamed for government shutdowns always get hammered by the public and at the polls. Trump also threatened an entire continent's economy when he said this about NAFTA.
We have begun formal renegotiation with Mexico and Canada on NAFTA. I personally don't think you can make a deal without a termination, but we're going to see what happens, okay? You're in good hands, I can tell you.
What would terminating NAFTA really do? Higher tariffs at the border. That would hurt businesses in U.S., Mexico, and Canada. It would create supply chain chaos for businesses, hurting their bottom lines. He's the pro-business president. It would make almost everything we buy at a store more expensive, not to mention damaging our relationship with some of our closest allies on the planet. Later, Trump talked about former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio and hinted at possible pardon for him.
By the way, I'm just curious. Do the people in this room like Sheriff Joe? Was Sheriff Joe convicted for doing his job? That's what. He should have had a jury, but you know what? I'll make a prediction. I think he's going to be just fine, okay?
Trump says Arpaio was just doing his job, but Arpaio's job as sheriff was to both enforce and uphold the law, and Arpaio did not. He was convicted this year in federal court of criminal contempt. Not only did he and his deputies racially profile Latinos, whether they were here legally or not, then turn those people over to immigration officials, something he did, by the way, for years, but Arpaio continued to do so after the courts ordered him to stop. That's why Arpaio was convicted and why so many would find a pardon of him so objectionable. And Rich, as I said before, we could go on and on with this. It was the kind of display that we saw during the campaign, but from a sitting president of the United States, I'm not sure we've ever seen something like this before.
Yeah, and it gets a little monotonous for us, and I'm sure for the audience, when we say, never seen this before, uncharted territory. We grade on unbelievable curves because anything he does that doesn't sound, frankly, off, we'll say that's presidential now, maybe. But for anyone who thinks after 7 months and the ping-pong between reading off a prompter and sounding, I don't know, I wouldn't go as far as presidential, but at least competent, to then the next day going off on these rants, targeting groups here or picking fights with everyone from every single, whether it be ethnicity, political party, and everything else in between. He is who he is. And I want to get to a few polls to just show where the public thinks of him. And Ralph, we'll go through in whatever order you want. But let's bring up here, because to me, the Quinnipiac, it just came out with a poll. This is the views of the president. Do they believe, how's he doing in his job? And the number isn't just 59 to 41. This doesn't even count the undecideds. This is like 2-to-1 margins for all of these. In fact, dividing the nation, it's 62 to 31 that they believe he is dividing this country. Do you imagine that? 7 months into a presidency without any major existential crisis that he's had to deal with. He's dividing the country by a 2-to-1 margin. Honesty, again, 2-to-1. People believe that he's dishonest. Bad leadership skills. Not level-headed, Andrew. Almost 70% answered that he, in fact, is not. To that point, you had Clapper on, the former intelligence chief, who said that not only echoing, by the way, what Senator Corker and others have said, Republicans, that they worry about his competency, he went as far as to say not only competency, he's afraid that he has access to nuclear codes. And Clapper's not known to be an extremist by any means. He's sober-minded. People are saying this out loud. Yeah. We've heard people talk to us individually off camera, and now even people, also you've seen the source many places where people didn't want to attach their name. You have people going on record as saying what they've said before, not only questioning competency, questioning motive, And this is all in the wake, obviously, of an investigation where the former FBI chief is now leading into Russia. We are in scary times.
It's his temper that I think has me frightened today. That's what scared me today. There'll be something else tomorrow, and there was something else yesterday. But the press conference at Trump Tower, when he doubled down on his Charlottesville thing and equated both sides as being, all the reporting is that he was so angry at the reception that he got from his initial comments in Charlottesville. And by all the reporting that we've seen, it was anger that fueled his comments in Phoenix last night. And this is despite knowing and being advised that, no, stick to your script. Don't go out there. Don't divide people even further. If he's willing to follow his anger to such impulses on what is fairly important in terms of this public appearance, who's to say what would happen when we wind up in a military conflict, which eventually will happen to a greater degree than we saw with North Korea? Who's to say that his anger wouldn't lead him to make other decisions? I'm not sure that we're in a new zone here in terms of temperament, in terms of decision making by this president. And if you really hold a lot of credence that his advisors would somehow tackle him before he does something stupid that's against the entire national interest, they can't stop him from doing this.
I want to give people an idea, Andrew. These are some of the kind of stories. I'm going to do this and rattle off this in quick fashion. That today you won't even hear reported because there's such a fire hose of crazy town coming out of this administration. For one, Canada is being overwhelmed right now by immigrants from the U.S. Immigrants are fleeing the United States to go to Canada. Think about what that says about the country they're in, and they'd rather be somewhere else. Two, Jewish unions, I'm talking Orthodox, conservative, reform, agree on very little. For the last 8 years, they always have a call before High Holy Days. They refused with a scathing letter to meet with this president or have a conversation or even be in a call with this president. You have pro-teams saying they won't even go to this White House. The Kennedy Center Awards, people don't want to be seen. You have charities canceling Mar-a-Lago or the Trump. People don't want to be anywhere near that. You put on top of that, Ralph, I'm going to need another minute here, that you put on top of all that, that now he has basically doubled down with a war with the Republican Party. He was in Arizona yesterday. John McCain, who's fighting cancer right now, he insulted almost in name only John McCain after everything he's given to this country and misstated, as you said, that he was the guy who cost him Obamacare. Please. And he had the temerity to then support a guy who broke the law and was convicted, Arpaio, threatening him because of civil rights violations. He's the guy who's going to get ready with a pardon. So I ask you, Andrew, with all this, why is he doing this? He had to know. One day he reads off a prompter. Why do this? Is it as simple as being the angry guy?
I think that's part of it, but I also think, look at all the bad press. Look at all the stories that you just rattled off about people who are fleeing from this president, including Republican lawmakers, including business leaders. We didn't mention those, religious leaders. So the people who actually cast their vote for Donald Trump must be wondering what's going on. And I think part of this is a reassurance to them that you're not alone. Look, there are a group of people here. Look at how big we filled the room. And you know, it helps him and it helps them in his last sort of attempt to try to keep them all together. But we have seen that kind of groupthink and mob mentality before. Fortunately, not that often in the United States, but we've seen it with disastrous consequences to democracies in other parts of the world. And I don't have to go back all that far, and I think most people know what I'm talking about. The potential downside of where we go from here, I mean, there's no bottom to it.
I have a more cynical. I think people who've watched this show with regularity know that for the better part of a year, I've said Russia will be the biggest story that we'll talk about in 2017. And I think, not that I wanted to, but I think I'm proven right. I think the story gets bigger. From what we're hearing, the noose is tightening even more. We'll have more on that after the break. And I believe, cynical though this may sound, the president might be looking to lay out an exit plan for himself here. And he's doing it in the ugly way possible. I won't go quietly in the good night. I want the terms that I want if I do want to get out here. And I've got a lot of angry folks out here who'll support me no matter what. Finally, what the president did last night, where he directly threatened the media for the audacity of reporting the truth, pointing them out, sometimes by name, but certainly at the event saying there they are, they're not American, they don't love this country, pointing out other groups that way as well. It is a matter of when, not if, we have tragedy in this country, and that tragedy will lie at the doorstep and the foot of this president who is pouring kerosene on a fire that he lit. And to me, that is one of the most shameful things I have seen in recent times. Andrew, thank you very much. All right, coming up next, we'll have updates on two major legal cases getting lost in all the Trump stumble. Special Counsel Bob Mueller's Russia-Trump investigation continues, as I said. We'll let you know what they're reportedly working on and the damage it could bring to the president. Also, jury selection has now wrapped in the trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. Our legal team will take a look at the case as the definition of corruption continues to change.